Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I wish to welcome you and those who are on their way to come here from near and far, all the participants, distinguished guests, ambassadors, foreign ministry officials, ladies and gentlemen. This is our second conference that we are doing on the issue of Africa, and some people might ask, what is it to do with a center that is involved with Iranian Persian Gulf and West Africa? And this is part of we have two reasons for that we are doing this conference. First of all, because of the importance of Africa, the growing importance of Africa in world affairs, because of the globalization effect that we have more and more in recent years, that regions are not closed regions, they are open, they have contacts with other regions, and the growing importance of Africa, it is felt not only in the world in general, but also for the Persian Gulf countries, which have from various reasons and interests, they have their activities into the African continent. The second reason is that one of our fellows, Dr. Moshe Truman, has recently inaugurated this research on Islam and Muslim Africa Center, which is very timely, and it is, of course, a territory or a field that we wish to extend and expand our knowledge and our activities in it. So these are the main two reasons that we thought about this international conference on Islam in Africa. Of course, there are other issues. If you are talking about the importance of Africa, there are questions like uranium enrichment and uranium deposits or mineral things, or the activities of Islamic fundamentalism in Africa, which have recently seen a few examples of it. So all these things are, I think, focusing more and more, a growing international focus on this continent. Given the issue that we are half an hour behind time, so I will make it much shorter than what I wanted to say. I wish to thank the organizers of this conference, whoever helped in organizing the conference, from foreign ministry, from the embassies, different embassies, and especially to Amit Barak, who is our administrator, and she almost single-handedly orchestrated the whole thing. So she had a lot of bureaucratic and other challenges she overcome very masterfully. I wish you all an interesting conference. I hope that this will be a start of academic cooperation with institutes working on Africa, whether from the African continent or outside the African continent. I'm asking, please, you can shut your cell phones or quieten it if it is possible. Given the fact that we are on the first day of Hanukkah, so I wish you all happy Hanukkah as well. And I wish to invite Dr. Truman, who is, as I said, a fellow of the Oded Center for Iran and Persian Gulf countries, Persian Gulf states, to deliver his speech. Please, thank you.
Thank you very much, Soli. First of all, I would like to thank really the Ezri Center, Amit Barak, Soli Shavar, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, everyone else who helped make this conference happen. Now, I would like to take this advantage in order to speak a little bit about my new organization that I established just this February, the think tank for the research on Islam and Muslims in Africa, and to tell you a little bit about it. So First of all, RIMA, that's the short, is the only think tank of its kind which is solely dedicated to Islamic Muslim countries and communities in Africa and the diaspora. There is another institute, to be truthful, in Northwestern University in Chicago, but they are dealing with only Islamic thought in Africa, and this is much more comprehensive than that. The RIMA is based in Jerusalem. However, it has an international staff comprised of 12 researchers from Israel, the US, South Africa, Ethiopia, Somalia, and Nigeria. The researchers are Muslims, Christians, and Jews. The Muslims, by the way, are African Muslims from Africa itself. RIMA's aims are to promote research on Islam in Africa and on Muslim countries and communities in Africa and the African diaspora, to achieve a better understanding of current issues affecting Islam and Muslims in Africa, to provide vital information and material on the culture, economy, social issues, politics, etc. within African Muslim countries and communities, to collaborate with other think tanks, as we are doing just now, institutes and research centers in organizing conferences, seminars and workshops, and in conducting joint research projects, and to be a home and platform for scholars specializing in these topics to conduct research and or publish their conduct. Now, I'm very proud and happy to say that 2 weeks ago I signed an MOU with the Institute for Peace and Security Studies of Addis Ababa University, which is a premier institute for higher learning and research on peace and security studies in Africa, which is also connected to the African Union. We agreed to collaborate and strengthen the work of both our institutions. The areas of collaboration will be focused on religious-based conflicts, the nexus between climate change and conflict in the Horn of Africa and Africa in general, as well as on the advancement of understanding and knowledge on Islam in Africa and on Muslim countries and communities in Africa and the African diaspora. The joint activities will include, the future joint activities will include research and policy analysis, policy dialogues with the African Union, knowledge dissemination, academic exchanges and mutual visits, joint research and publications, joint organization of conferences, seminars and workshops, etc. In January the following year, I am invited to come to Ethiopia and discuss it in person, to know all the stuff, and it's really going to go well. This conference's aim is to put the subject of Islam in Africa and through it the African continent on the agenda in Israel and abroad, while trying to shed light on different aspects of Islam and Muslims' life, culture throughout Africa. So I wish all of us really a very fruitful, interesting, beneficial conference, and I would like to invite Professor Haggai Erlich to start the first panel.
Thank you all. Congratulations to RIMA, to the Moving Spirit, Moshe Terdiman, to Soli Shahawar, the hosting fellow. After the collapse of communism, the victory of capitalism and of free market economy, of materialism, competitiveness, of pressurizing lifestyle, our generation witnesses the revival of religiosity as a balancing factor. It is a global phenomenon, and not least in Africa, and for obvious reasons. Both Christianity and Islam are flourishing across the continent. However, our first panel today deals with the history of the Jewish state in Africa. Israel began her involvement in the continent as a young state, in a continent of young emancipating states. And also with countries like Ethiopia, with which Israel had relations from biblical times. Israel's roles in Africa began amid romantic expectations and developed along dramas and changes of which we shall hear this morning. Much of this history had indeed to do with the role of Islam and Arabs in Africa. I am sure we shall learn a lot on that from our three experts. They will speak in direct sequence, and then hopefully we shall have some time for discussion. The first speaker is Ambassador Avri Granot, head of Africa Division in the Israeli Foreign Ministry. Himself, he served many years as an ambassador in Africa and has the wisdom and experience to enlighten us on engagement, rejection, and engagement, Africa-Israel relations. The second speaker will be Dr. Arye Oded, ambassador retired and senior member of the Truman Institute at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Oded has combined throughout many years academic research, publishing, and teaching in Israeli and African universities with the practical life of an ambassador to various countries in Africa. He recently published an authoritative book on Israel in Africa. Dr. Oded will speak on Islamic factor in African-Israeli relations. Our third speaker, Mr. Erlich Avidar, is the president of the Israel-Africa Chamber of Commerce. Avidar served many years in the foreign ministry, represented Israel in various countries, and advised the leaders of Israel on Islamic, Arab, and economic affairs. He will speak on the Islamic and Arab factor in the commercial relations between Israel and the African studies. And I will be a very harsh timekeeper. So, Avi Granot, please.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, colleagues, dear friends. Although we are these days celebrating the holiday of Hanukkah, I would like to use a line from Passover, from Pesach. Ma nishtana. Why is this night different from all other nights? Why is this Africa different from all other Africas? And why our relationship with Africa is quite different. I've entitled my presentation, and I'll try to keep an eye on the watch before you do, Haggai. I have entitled Engagement, Rejection, and Engagement, which is basically the story of years of relations between the State of Israel and the African continent. But it's also the story of the changes of Africa. It is the story also of the changes that we have gone through in Israel. And I would like, in brief comments, to try and touch on all three elements. We often talk about the independence of Africa in terms of the declarations in the 60s of African countries of their independence. That has been the independence from a period of colonialism, but Africa depended then still very, very much on the colonialist powers, and we know that although officially African leaders were declaring independence, still the impact and the involvement of colonialist powers, mostly European countries, has engaged Africa quite deeply. This was a period, I call it the period of assistance, where African countries needed tremendous amount of assistance. This is a period that for us in Israel is very well known. This is a period when we also, as a newly evolving country and society, depended very much on contributions from the world. I remember a story when I served in Canada in the very early 80s, and I met one of the philanthropists, Charles Bronfman, one of the wealthy Canadians, who contributed a lot to the State of Israel, and I asked him, what about investing in Israel? And his immediate answer was, well, Israel is not a country for investment. Israel is a country for contribution. And to a large extent, Africa, for a very long time, looked at itself also in the same spirit. We used to joke, and whenever I talk about Israel, I think of Africa. So you will see how close we were in our evolving societies. We used to say that the best way for a foreign investor to make $1 million in Israel is to come with $2 million. It applied very, very much to the early years of Africa, and we engaged in Africa exactly in that spirit, the spirit of assistance. We have developed very close ties with Africa. We have engaged Africa in all possible ways. We have opened 30 embassies in the African continent. By the way, today we have only 10 embassies. We have opened 30 embassies in Africa, where our leaders have thought that the best way to help Africa would be to try and bring our expertise to Africa, our experts and our expertise. And one of the things that we discovered later on, that engagement was a very short-term engagement, not only from the point of view of politics, and I'll touch on that in a minute, but also from the point of view of service to Africa, because once our experts, whether it was in water systems, whether it was in agriculture, whether it was in infrastructure, once they left the African continent, those elements just simply collapsed. Anyone who will travel throughout Africa can see those farms that had been established in the 60s and very early 70s in African countries by Israeli experts, all actually destroyed, dilapidated, and with no future. So that was the kind of engagement we had with Africa. Of course, in 1973, as a result of Arab League decision, as a result of the war in the Middle East, a decision has been taken by the Organization of African Unity to sever relations with Israel, and in a very short while, the whole African continent, with all our engagement, have sent us back home. Of course, this was a very painful act for Israel. In one day, we lost all our friends in Africa. We took it quite seriously. It took us quite some time to return to Africa. We are still in the process of returning to Africa. But one of the things that one has to realize is that since then Africa has gone through very dramatic changes. And if the economist in the year 2000, not so long ago, has referred to the continent as a hopeless continent, in 2011, just 11 years later, the same economist came out with a special issue referring to Africa as a rising continent. What has dramatically changed in Africa was a less dependency on foreign elements to dictate for African countries what Africa should be doing. When African leaders decided in 1973 to kick out Israel as a unanimous decision by the whole continent except 4 countries, the decision was not an independent decision of African leaders. We know for sure that many African leaders felt terrible about it. Many African leaders felt that those decisions were actually against the interests of their own countries and their own people. African leaders have called our ambassadors with apologies and said, we are sorry, but we are obligated to do that. We are obligated to do that because of external decision, not internal. What we see today in Africa is really the development towards independence, where African countries are now more and more taking responsibility for their own actions, taking responsibility for their own decisions, relying less on pressures and powers from external forces, relying on their population to elect them again and again, relying on democratic values, on principles of free market economy, relying on investment rather than on contribution. That is the new Africa to which Israel is now ready to engage. Now, a couple words about Israel. We, years ago, as a young country, believed that the government is rich and the public is poor. Whether it was true or not is irrelevant, but that was a belief. The government is the one to provide for everything, including making sure that unemployment is very low by ensuring that there are so many civil servants. And government involvement under the Mashav title in Africa was very, very extensive. We have gone through very dramatic changes in our economic system in the 80s, and as a result of that, today, the real money is in private hands. Government claim to be very poor. We can argue about how poor is the government. If you ask the Minister of Finance, we are very, very, very poor, and we as civil servants feel it on a regular basis. Our budgets are being cut again and again. Mashav project is going down instead of going up. Civil service is being cut continuously. Even our traveling abroad has been now ceased because it was decided that government officials should not be traveling abroad. I can understand when it comes to other ministries, like the Ministry of Religious Affairs, but it's difficult for us in the Foreign Ministry not to be able to visit the various continents and countries, but those are part of the problems. But Israel is not a poor country. Israel is not a poor country, but our economy is based on the private sector. We have seen the kind of changes, economic changes that Europe has gone through, and we have survived the difficulties of Spain and Portugal and Greece and France and so many European countries because of our economy being so solidly focused on the private sector, on the business sector, and the business sector is now our contributor to the development in Africa. We very much in the Foreign Ministry welcome that kind of development because now we are not talking about assistance which is always short-lived, but we are talking about investment which inherently are long-lived. Investors who want to see profit, investors who want to see development, investors who want to see engagement, investors who want to see solid governance, investors want to see liberal banking systems, and Africa today, more and more African countries are offering exactly those elements to permit Israeli investors to look at the possibilities and the potentials in the African continent. That for us is a new engagement that we are so much welcoming, and this is why we focus more and more with the help of the Ministry of the Economy, with the help of the Export Institute, and with the great help of the Israel-Africa Chamber of Commerce, which has been revived under the leadership of Avidar, and made it possible to engage more and more Israeli companies in working in the African continent. To that, I have to add to the fact that we see more and more solidity in governance, we see more and more internal engagement, we see Africa dealing with its own conflict, we see more and more African leaders engaged, for example, in crises like the one in Somalia, what the Americans and others were not able to resolve. Now Africa, under a combined force of the Ugandans and the Ethiopians and Kenyans are fighting for freedom in Somalia. We see more and more African forces engaged in Mali. We see more and more African forces engaged in conflicts in the Central African Republic rather than foreign elements. We see Africa leading the conflict in Congo and Rwanda. We see Africa taking responsibility for itself, and that, of course, is a very, very welcoming development. To that, of course, as Professor Erlich has mentioned, one has also to see that the changes, the so-called African Spring, the changes that we have seen in North Africa has also a tremendous impact on the African continent. Number one, Africa now has been engaged more and more in trying to defend itself against the rise of Islamic extremism, Islamic radicalism, and the other speakers will talk about that more extensively, but that has also engaged more and more Africa in the direction of Israel. We have seen in the last 2.5 years over 50 African leaders visiting Israel. Presidents, when I talk about African leaders, I'm talking about presidents, prime ministers, foreign ministers, defense ministers, national security advisors, over 50 of them in the last 2.5 years, trying to learn from the Israeli experience, trying to understand how Israel has been successful so far, that route in fighting the rise of terrorism and extremism, how Israel has been trying to fight against the influx of very sophisticated weapons in the wrong hands stemming from the collapse of Libya and other areas. Those all elements have engaged us more extensively within the African continent. About a year ago, we hosted here the visit of one of the presidents, was President Museveni of Uganda. And towards the end of his visit, I hosted him for dinner, and I was trying to summarize the visit and spoke quite a bit about his meetings with the business sector, his meetings with the private sector, and we talked more and more and more about cooperation between the two countries, how Israel and Uganda could cooperate in so many areas. And those of you who know President Museveni with his big head, now that's not very often that you see him smiling, and he was kind of enjoying himself very much. And at one point I stopped and I said, Mr. President, anything wrong? You are sitting here all smiling. And he said, no, you continue. As long as you talk about cooperation and you don't talk about assistance, I'm happy. And I think this is very much a message for us. Africa today is not the same Africa of assistance as Israel today is not the same country of contribution. No, we want to see foreign investors. And yes, it means that we have to engage. We have to engage foreign investors. We have to know that foreign investment comes in order to earn more and more money, and that is legitimate. And the more they earn, the more they invest, and the more they'll be able to help the societies. This is the new engagement of Israel in Africa. Israeli companies today are heavily engaged throughout Africa in everything one can see. Whether it is in construction, whether it is in establishment of sophisticated farms, whether it is in establishment of infrastructure, whether it is in energy, in all possible fields, including, of course, high-tech. High-tech has basically leaped Africa by a whole new generation. I remember years ago, during my years in Addis Ababa, and we had here the ambassador, among other ambassadors, the ambassador Haggai of Ethiopia, and you'll remember that there were discussions about how to wire this huge country to make possible communication between the various regions. And I'm happy you didn't start wiring it, because today there's no need anymore for wires. You have saved quite a lot of copper. Today, that leap has been very much helped and assisted by the State of Israel through the various developments that we have achieved. That, in a very short while, and before Haggai throws me off the podium, is how we engage today the African continent. And I have to say that the Economist was very much right. If in 2011 it referred to Africa as a hopeful continent, we see that Africa is proving, this is true of most of the African countries, more and more that it deserves this title. And to end my presentation, I just want to read to you what the Minister for Africa in Great Britain just recently has said. Mark Simmons just recently has said a message that I think we all should remember. And I quote, while the ongoing situation in Mali, Somalia and other conflicts are in the forefront of politics and the international media's narrative on Africa, it is important that we don't lose sight of the emerging positive story of the African continent. We now hear justifiably of rising Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the insightful and full of prospective survey and analysis of the transformation from the period of romanticism and contribution to today's period of sobriety and cooperation. And in between the crisis of 1973, of which everyone, I think, learned his lesson. I want to just intervene for 1 minute to remind ourselves of the Israeli perspective of that year, 1973, and the years leading to that, 71, 72, in which the consensus building in Africa was that Israel should be more flexible towards the Arabs and Egypt and Anwar Sadat. I found out in the Israeli archive, a report from the Israeli ambassador, that Haile Selassie said, tell Golda Meir that there is an Amharic saying that man invented the stairs because God did not give him wings. Namely, don't reach for the sky for direct negotiations of full peace. Work slowly and with patience, the way we do in Africa. And Israel, I think today also have to remember this African teaching of us at the time that we failed to do. So just a remark by way of asking Dr. Arye Oded to speak about the Islamic factor in the Israeli-African relations. Dr. Oded, please. Any computer wizard?
Anybody
in the audience?
12 years old?
Any grandson of someone? Huh?
Oh, in it. Okay.
Excellencies, Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to talk about the Islamic factor in Africa-Israel relation. Relation between Africa and Israel have been typified by acute changes from strong friendship to rupture of diplomatic ties, and then again Israel returned back to Africa. The reason for that was also the Islamic factor. Some scholars exaggerated the influence of Islamic factor as a reason for these changes, and some others have minimized it. To clarify the actual influence of the Islamic factor, it's necessary to examine its importance during 3 periods. First, the heyday or the golden years of Israel's relation with Africa in the late 50s and in the 60s. The second period is the 1970s, when nearly all African countries severed diplomatic relations with Israel. And the third period is the return of Israel to Africa. May I say that my conclusions are also based on my personal experience while serving in Africa during each of these three periods. And in each period, there is a difference in the influence of Islam on Africa-Israel relation. As for the first period, during the process of establishment of relation between Israel and most African countries, the Islamic factor played very little part. Israel enjoyed political, economic, and technical cooperation with 33 sub-Saharan African countries that gained their independence during that period, including countries where the Muslim population was 80 to 90% of the population. And I want to show how can we... איפה זה המסך?
לא, למעלה, מופיע, זה מופיע. זה הכל שם.
כאן. כן, איפה כאן? איפה רואים כאן על המסך?
על המסך למעלה.
Well, it's very high. Anyhow, as you see, I want to show you that during this highway period, that even Muslim countries with 50 to 80% even Muslims, we had a diplomatic relation with them. For example, Benin, Chad, Gambia, Guinea, 80% Muslim, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, with all these countries with a majority or a very great percentage of Muslim, we succeeded to have diplomatic relation with them in the 60s. But the reason for that Islam at that time in sub-Saharan Africa was not influential, first of all, because except Egypt, Abdel Nasser, all Arab countries, they haven't got very much interest in Africa, while Israel was one of the first countries to have technical cooperation with the African countries. Secondly, another reason is that in the 50s and the 60s, Arab Islamic activity against Israel had not yet been affected by sub-Saharan African Islam, which was exceptionally tolerant. I remember in the 60s, in the beginning of the 60s, as you see my hair, when I was in Africa, I could interview muftis, sheikhs, imams, and in fact they even allowed me to go with my tape recorder to record the prayers and some religious songs, and I had no problem with that. Even they used to invite me to ceremonies, Eid al-Fitr and others, although I told them that I'm an Israeli and I'm a Jewish. So they did not mind about that. And I remember another event that immediately after the 6-Day War, the Muslims leaders still continue to come to Israel to visit Al-Aqsa Mosque and other Islamic sites. And one of them was the Minister of Development of Sierra Leone, a very devout Muslim. And of course, when he came to Israel, I accompanied him. First of all, he wanted to go to Al-Aqsa Mosque to pray. And he prayed for a long time there. And then when he came out, he saw the Jews praying at the Western Wall. And he said, I want also to go there and pray. He put a scalp cap on his head, and he went there and he prayed. And then he said, now I want to go to the Holy Church of Sepulchre to visit the Jesus Christ tomb. So we went there, and he was there praying near the tomb, and also he lighted a candle, and he gave a generous donation to the priest there. And I was surprised because, okay, to visit, it's all right, to visit the places, but to pray there, for me, it was a bit unusual. So he noticed my surprise, and he told me, I see you are surprised, but I did it because to make assurance triple sure. And he also added that, you in the Middle East, you believers in the Middle East are extremists, but we are not. So this was another example of the tolerance of sub-Saharan Islam to other religions. Another reason for Muslim acceptance of Israel is the Africanization of Islam. We say Africanization of Islam. Many African traditional beliefs and customs were incorporated into African Islam. Moreover, some African Muslims had reservations about the Arabization and politicization of Islam. For example, the well-known Muslim leader from Mali, Ahmadou Hamdaba, preached that since Islam had spread all over the world and become universal religion, it's not anymore a monopoly of Arab and Arabism. And he objected to subject the Arab political influence on the local Islam. A fourth reason is the principle of separation of church and state. All African states, nearly all African states, when they became independent, they declared that they are secular, in French, laïque, and that they against mixing religion with politics. Because African countries have got enough problems with the ethnic problem, and they did not want to add another, the religion, to the problem that damaged their national unity. So, for example, most of the African countries prohibited the establishment of parties that are based on religion or ethnic ideology. I want to give also another example that during the visit to Nigeria of that time Minister for Foreign Affairs Golda Meir, the Arabs in Nigeria, they tried to protest against her visit, against the Zionist Minister for Foreign Affairs that time. It was in 1964. So they tried also to incite some Muslim sheikhs and leaders to protest against her visit. The government of Nigeria, the federal government of Nigeria at that time was headed by a Muslim, it was headed by Muslim, and he published a public statement condemning the protest of the Arab embassies and saying that they should not intervene in Nigeria foreign affairs. And eventually, Golda Meir visited the country because in the ministry itself, even our ambassador in Nigeria suggested that Golda Meir will not come because she might be in an unpleasant situation. And also within the African department, I remember there were some people that thought it's better to skip Nigeria and go to Cote d'Ivoire or another country. But Golda Meir insisted. She said, I've got an invitation, I'm going there. And she went there, and she was warmly welcomed by the government and by other even Muslim ministers. So we see that there was objection of most African countries, even with a large majority of Muslims, to mix religion with politics. Now I want to move on to the second period when diplomatic relations were broken off. They were politically based, but after '69, the religious factor gradually grew in importance. This was firstly because the act of a disturbed Australian visitor who set a fire to Al-Aqsa Mosque, a small part of Al-Aqsa Mosque, and Israel was condemned for that, and demonstration against Israel by Muslims broke out all over the world, including in Africa. Secondly, in '69, Muammar Gaddafi seized power in Libya and took the lead in exploiting Islam for political purposes. Gaddafi, he considered himself as disciple of Abdel Nasser, who said that Muslims should utilize Islam for political purposes. So he succeeded, while Nasser did not succeed in his efforts. I think that Gaddafi succeeded to a large extent, especially in Uganda, when Idi Amin, the Muslim Idi Amin, expelled all the Israelis from the country and declared that Uganda, although in Uganda there are about 70 to 80% Christian, he said that Uganda is a Muslim country. Another reason for the Islam growing influence was the visit of Saudi King Faisal. He came to West Africa, he visited several African countries, and in the name of Islam, in solidarity of Muslims in the world, he asked them to sever contacts with the Zionist state. Thus, the number of Arab embassies in Africa afterwards, during the severance of relation, increased, and special funds and banks were established to help African countries. There was also an increase in Islamic projects. They established Islamic Cultural Center. They dispatched delegation, ba'athat, to Africa and worked like the Christian missionaries. And then also they increased the da'wah, the Islam da'wah. This is the propagation of Islam. Also, they established few universities in Africa. For example, Saudi Arabia built a university, Islamic university in Uganda, and also another university in Niger to propagate Islam. And now I came to the third and last period in the saga of Israel-Africa relation. The process started with the renewal of relation with Zaire. Now it is the Democratic Republic of Congo in May '82, and after Zaire, other countries follow suit. And the influence of Islamic factor was in that those Islamic countries that were among the first to sever diplomatic relations with Israel, they were the last to renew relation with Israel. A few African countries with a vast Muslim majority have still not renewed ties with Israel. These include Mali, that had a relation with us in the 60s. Mali, Guinea, and Chad has not yet renewed diplomatic relations with Israel, and later on also Mauritania, that member of the Arab League, when in '95 they started their ties with Israel. So afterwards also Mauritania did not cut off diplomatic relations with us. So only few countries have not yet renewed diplomatic relation with Israel. I have to finish my lecture in a conclusion and say that, in conclusion, that the main reason for the radical changes in Africa-Israel relation were political and economic, although it is fair to say that Islam as a factor played a secondary and supporting role. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oded. Oded's book on Islam in Uganda is still a classical as an analysis of the role of Islam in East Africa or in Africa as a whole. I would like to underline something that Arye Oded was dwelling upon. In the heyday of Israeli influence in the 50s and 60s, there was an Arab world. It was secular, ideologically oriented. Nasser spoke of an Islamic circle, an African circle, but he was mainly an Arab and a secular socialist. He was trying to use Islam as a vehicle in Africa, but he oppressed the Muslim brothers at home, and he hanged their leaders, Said Qutb and others. Islam at the time was not really politically leading the field. One of the big changes in the background to everything we saw was the demise of secular pan-Arabism and the rise of political Islam in the Middle East and all over the world. And as such, Islam knows no ethnic or linguistic boundaries, and Islam is crossing the continent politically. Moderate Islam, extreme radical Islam, and so on. But we are no longer in the days of secular Arabism, but of active political Islam, and that's making a big difference in the role of Islam in Africa, and of course its impact on Israeli relations. Mr. Avidar, the president of Chamber of Commerce of Africa and Israel, will address us on the economic aspect of the relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will make an attempt to remember everyone, but first of all, the distinguished ambassadors, the ambassador of Ethiopia, the ambassador of Angola, the ambassador of Eritrea, the ambassador of Nigeria, distinguished diplomats. Very happy to see you here. We meet a lot in economic events, and I believe that we need to do that even more. I also would like to thank Arye, Oded, and the members of the panel, and to say a few words about Ambassador Aviv Granot, that I am a former member of the Israeli diplomatic service, and I can say that from my experience, 16 years in the service, there was never a deputy director general that was so devoted and dedicated to the African subject. And Avi, not only that he see it as a mission, but he really know how to affect the leaders of the ministry and the ministers, and especially the current one who just returned back, to get him excited on this subject, which is really important. And Avi, kol hakavod. To Haggai, I want to say that I assure you that I will keep the time. Here I put the timer. And I also want to recognize a few Israeli ambassadors in the audience. The former ambassador of Angola, the future ambassador to Egypt, and the former of South Sudan. And to begin to say thank you very much to Dr. Soli Shachvar. This is not working really. I'm putting it and it's going back. For hosting this conference, and in a few seconds you will see why it is relevant to have this specific conference in your under the auspices of your center and about Shia. But you see that? It's by purpose. You are too tall. Thank you very much. And to Dr. Moshe Terdman, I want to say, first of all, it is a pleasure to be his friend. Moshe came to me something like a year ago, spoke about the center, spoke about the importance, and he's this kind of leaders that put a target on the wall and move steady and fast until he achieve it. And I want to say kol hakavod for making this happen. It is an extremely important center that you established, because I believe that especially on the economic aspects, the key factor, as we see it in the Israel-Africa Chamber of Commerce, is to know exactly the environment of which we want to do business. And Africa is a continent with a lot of cultures and a lot of aspects. And we, the business community, we need to learn more. Definitely not to do mistakes, but in order to be efficient and to be more productive. And that's why we encourage the members of our chamber to be engaged with the center, and the center is also a member of the Israel-Africa Chamber of Commerce. We encourage them to be engaged with the center, and whenever you have, even in a specific district, it doesn't have to be mainly in a country, but you want to go and to do a business contract, a business deal, a business project in a district when you have the population there is practicing Islam, we encourage them definitely to go to RIMA and to get the information they need so that they will be more efficient. I believe that, first of all, the subject that I was asked to speak about is the Islamic and Arabic factor in our business relations with Africa. And I believe that during the 60s and 70s, where there were the golden years of our economic and cooperation relations with Africa, I believe that Arab and Islamic factors were not major factors in our relations during those periods. And it was very good and very productive for the Israeli economy that was mainly pushed forward by the government. During those years, these were governmental companies, state-owned enterprises that were pushed by the government to do their business in those countries. And the Islamic factor during those periods was definitely not negative. And I do recall few incidences that in some countries, but as a whole, if we will generalize the picture, it was not a factor. But I believe that the main two factors in the beginning of the 90s, if we can put the arrow into two countries in Africa that were problematic in terms of our business connections with the continent, I speak about Libya and I speak about Egypt. Two countries that, on one hand, Libya, that the leader of Libya had the intention, he wanted very much to become a major leader in Africa. It was a different question because every month he was changing his strategy. 1 week he was an Arabian leader, the second week he was an African leader. 1 year he was dressing a galabia, which was more an Arabian style, and the next week it was more African style. But this was Muammar Gaddafi with all the amusement and humor, but he did very terrible things to his own country. And I believe that if you check the value, and I speak about dollars, that Gaddafi invested in threatening African leaders not to do business with Israel, you will be amazed about the amount of money. I'm sure that Avi has some details that he will not share with us because those are classified details. And when it comes to Egypt, I believe that it started with Gamal Abdel Nasser, but it was not only Nasser. There is a philosophy in Egypt. There is a school of thought in Egypt that was mainly guided by Boutros Ghali, that Egypt needs to play a role. Egypt needs to play a leadership role in the African continent, in the connection between the Middle East and Africa. It needs to maintain its position, and this is the complexity of Egyptian leadership in general, but definitely Egypt played a negative role in our relations with the continent. And unfortunately, I must say that even since we had diplomatic relations with Egypt, still Egypt was playing a negative role, definitely towards countries that we didn't have at that time diplomatic relations, and they were very active to check and to see that renewal of diplomatic relations with Israel will not be in a fast mode, as they said. And I have my own experience on the other part of the Nile and the area when I was the head of mission in Qatar. From 1999 to 2001, it was the same role that Egypt played towards countries like Mali, Chad, and others that it played with Qatar, that Egypt did not want to see Islamic countries, Arabian countries, establishing diplomatic relations with Israel. It wanted it to be under the control of Egypt, and definitely it was the same role with the African continent. But I will speak why I said a few words to Dr. Soli, because there are factors, there are not major factors, but we see it growing, and the Iranian factor in the African continent. And this we definitely see it in West Africa. I can share with you my own experience when I visited in the end of 2007 Sierra Leone, and there is a significant Lebanese community, which is funny. There is a story about the Israelis here will find it amusing. Maybe I'll start with it. People don't know why the Lebanese citizens ended up in West Africa. The story goes that 100 years ago, the Shiite community in Lebanon was very depressed, oppressed, not really valued and respected. So they were looking for new avenues to find a new future. And most of the Lebanese that ended up in West Africa were given a ticket, were sold a ticket to the boats to take them to America. And they dropped them on the shores of West Africa, and they told them, this is America. We Israelis have some experiences of Jewish immigrants that came to Israel, and when they came to the airport, they said right away, we want to be in Jerusalem. So they took them to the outback, to far areas in the Negev, telling them this is Jerusalem, where it was Dimona, Yerucham, and others. So when I heard the story from the Lebanese leaders in Sierra Leone, I said we have the same experience in some factors. But the Iranian factor is definitely present in countries where we have significant Lebanese community. And unfortunately, in some places, it is a negative factor. Although, if you will generalize it, the Lebanese community in West Africa is very pro-business, very interested in business. They don't mix politics and business because they don't want politics to interrupt them from making money. And they are very interesting and professional business people, so that's why hopefully this will continue. Some of the factors that you could see, the Arabian factor, we have another experience in 2008. In 2008, the newly elected president of Liberia came to the state of Israel, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. She came, and after she left, I checked on her official website of the president's office. And I found out that 1 week before she arrived to Israel, she sent a minister to Tripoli, to the capital of Libya, to inform, and it was really written on her website, to inform Gaddafi that this visit is mainly protocol. It's not about creating substantial relations with the state of Israel. And when I visited in Sierra Leone, the newly elected president in Sierra Leone in the end of 2007, he said very openly that it was extremely difficult to maintain relations with Israel with the enthusiasm of Gaddafi to derail this kind of process. But if we can take the period, I believe that the line goes in the Arabian Spring. And I believe that, first of all, Gaddafi is no longer the leader of Libya, and the Libyan economy is mainly devoted to Libyan interests and no longer invested in creating problems in countries where the leaders do not want to go in accordance with Gaddafi's policy. And the other factor in the Arabian Spring is that Egypt is less active and influential in the Arabian, in the African continent, but mainly I would like to say the Arabian Gulf is much, much less focused on issues of political influence, Islamic influence in the continent. They are mainly interested on economic development. And you can see it even with Saudi Arabia, that in the 70s definitely used economic means to influence some of the countries and some of the leaders in the African continent, is less interested. And if they are interested in East Africa, they are mainly interested to develop economic hubs, to create their own investments. And I believe that this, by far, is a positive phenomenon. Definitely not negative, because the Arabian Spring, if it created something positive, it created a situation where countries and leaders are more focused on their own issues and internal issues. And they are more interested to maintain normal business relations with the outside world. And things that you couldn't even imagine before. Saudi Arabia making an effort to create better relations with China, for example. The Saudis never accepted China because of the anti-religion aspect. But right now, I believe that it is really a different atmosphere. But something that I would like to speak about, things that are more in our field of expertise, except for few countries in the sub-Saharan continent, in sub-Saharan Africa. And I will mention, in a general term, Mali, Chad, although there are Israeli companies working there, there are Israeli companies active, economically active in those countries, but in general, there are very few countries in the African continent that you can find reluctance to create business connections with the Israeli economy. My wife, as an example, a few months ago, she decided to travel to Niger. And I checked on our official website and I saw that we have no diplomatic relations. As an ex-diplomat, I said, sweetheart, are you sure you want to go there? We have no diplomatic relations with Niger. If something happens, there is nothing I can do except for crying and praying in the synagogue. And she said, no, I have an excellent partner there and I need to go there. She didn't have a visa. She just landed in the airport and she was accepted and there was no problem. And she made it a point for the next 7 days to send me pictures, photos of positive headlines in Niger regarding Israel. Op-ed articles saying we need to renew business connections with Israel, etc. And I believe that except for few countries that have their own internal problems and their own shaky situation, their own opposition and influence from the outside of Africa, I believe that by far we don't see any negative factor that can play a role in our business relations with the continent. Few words about Islam. It is a different Islam in most of the countries. And it is fascinating for me as a student of Islam. A few weeks ago we had WATEC, there was a conference and a major institution, the president came and I got his business card, and in the business card it was written Idrissa. And I started laughing and he said, why are you laughing? And I said, you know what's the name Idrissa? Idrissa, it's in the biblical name of Hanoch. And Hanoch, the biblical figure, is one of the key persons that established in our religion mystic Judaism. There is the book of Hanoch, and in the Bible it's written that Hanoch was not someone that spoke with God. It was written in the Bible that he walked with God. And I said to Idrissa, I will call you from now on the man who walked with God. And we are in the middle of WATEC in a conference, and we are speaking about mystic Islam and mystic Judaism, and it was fascinating. But this is the same situation that, from my own experience, that I see in a lot of areas. And I believe that we in Israel, we do not know enough about Islamic school of thoughts that are mainly in Africa, that we don't see them in the Middle East, especially from the mystic aspect of Islam. Sufi orders, unique Sufi orders that have a school of thought which is tolerant, moderate, loving, and they do not want to have the influence that come from our region, from our extreme people and our extreme thoughts. And that's why I said to Moshe Terdman when he came to me the first meeting, I said, it is extremely important that you are creating this center, because something that we need to do in Israel, not to generalize, to say this is Islam, because there is nothing called Judaism. There are a lot of fractions in Judaism, the same in Islam and the same in Christianity. But after we spoke about the Islamic and Arabian factor, I can tell you that by far today, it is irrelevant. Why it is irrelevant? Because everyone is focused on business development. And business development in the continent is booming in a caliber that we never expected it. Even the most optimistic viewers of the situation. You can see that 5-6 years ago, we could hear the sentence, I cannot go to Africa. Why? Because I cannot compete with the Chinese, with the state-owned enterprises, the SOEs from China. I cannot compete with them. Now, when you ask Israeli companies today, they respond, yes, I can compete, because even the big China, even the major state-owned enterprises, even the development bank of China, even the governmental banks of China can no longer address the full potential that comes from the continent. Even they can no longer do it. Today, even Chinese companies that in the past, state-owned enterprise, that by their own bylaws of the companies, by their own constitution, if you may, it is written that their own main objective is to develop China-Africa connections. So to hire other Chinese companies to bring products from China. Today, it is booming in a caliber that they are looking for cooperation. And this is an extremely, extremely positive phenomenon. But the potential is very interesting, and I believe that this is something that we are now starting to understand. If in the past we saw the potential in the major cities, in the developed countries, today the potential is in the outback, in the rural areas. The major projects of most of the African countries, they are focused on the rural areas. They have their own interest. Why? Because if you don't develop the rural area come to the major cities and create a problem for the major cities. But most of the projects are nowadays that we can see from all the tenders that we receive in Israel, in our chamber, we see that it is in the rural area. And this is why we in the chamber, we are optimistic. Why? Because if there is something that we didn't forget yet, is our flexibility, is our persistence, is the business people that are no longer wearing, they didn't get used too much to the suits of the high-tech, but they put their jeans and their t-shirts and they go in the outback and they don't care about bad conditions or difficult conditions because they want to achieve their own business goals there. And I believe that if you check the rural areas, you can find that in many countries, our people, when they meet communities that significant part of those communities sometimes are Muslim. And what they meet Islam that they can speak to, they can cooperate, they can do business, and they are accepted with a lot of tolerance. And one, I would say last thing, because I don't want to take more, I believe that I reached already, right? Haggai is very gentle and I appreciate it.
Still authoritative.
Still. I'm quiet, but I'm here. When I speak about the potential, I'll share with you an experience we had in the chamber just a few weeks ago. We realized that in all the major infrastructure projects, we see that the number one factor is credit. Number one factor is credit. And we brought from Europe, UBS, Credit Suisse, Deutsche Bank, we brought a lot of international banks that mainly finance those kind of projects. And what we see from there is quite difficult situation that on one hand, there is credit out there for us to do it, but on the other hand, it is a credit that is difficult to achieve when it comes to specific countries that their own accreditation in the international financial community is not in the upper scale of standards. And that's why when you want to get credit for those specific countries, you find it difficult. But I want to say that, and I'm speaking now in the last 2 minutes for my colleagues, the African ambassadors that are present here, I believe that the political factors, the religious factors, the national factors that were once factors are no longer relevant. Today we are facing a booming situation, booming economies, and these are not the 5 main usual suspect countries that we all speak about, but in each and every one of those, even small countries in the African economy, the governments want to develop, they want to create business models that will benefit their own people, and we definitely want to be there. So once again, I want to say to Moshe, kol hakavod, this is a phenomenal job, and I wish RIMA all the success. Thank you very much.
Well, someone wise once told me it's not a big deal to be a pessimist and make sense. It's a big deal to be an optimist and make sense. And thank you, Eli, for that. Indeed, I think that what is important today is stability for the states. We are witnessing instability in the Arab Middle East, but we are facing stability in Israel and in Africa. And we are really experiencing a good period of promising chances. Today, as Shimon Peres said, the real resource are ideas. And Israel, as an high-tech superpower, in that terms, is very resourceful, and Africa needs it for, in terms, as Ambassador Granot said, in terms of cooperation, not contribution. So we can allow ourselves only one round of questions because we have time constraints. So please.
Ambassador of Kenya. I want to put to Ambassador Avidar this issue of the Israeli government not being as wealthy as before and having moved to the private sector. Take this with the assistance that Israel has been giving to African countries through Mashar. You say Mashar is not as rich as before, but for the relations that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is responsible in ensuring or in getting the assistance, the development assistance to the country. How is this going to balance out that the wealth is now with the private sector to get the private sector to do something about the countries that they do business with? Because still out there, the government is not rich enough to take care of its public, and this assistance in development by the government is still necessary. How do you think this is going to balance?
Thank you, His Excellency. Second question? Yes, please. Ambassador Arye Yosef of Ethiopia.
Thank you, Professor Haggai. I would like to thank you for the presentation. 3 years ago when I came to Israel, some businessmen were telling me that Africa is not a place to invest. 3 years ago. And today I'm very happy to hear from Erlich and some of our friends here that Africa is a place to invest. But let me ask you a question. Africa, when we see from religion point of view, as Erlich already explained it, there are some areas where you have the most tolerant forms of Islam, like Ethiopia. Dr. Oded was telling us that a minister, while visiting the Holy Land, prayed in the street park, in the Jewish, Christian, Muslim place of worship. This time in Ethiopia, there are areas where Muslims and Christians together build mosques or churches. But this is not well known by Israelis. Israelis feel they don't really know what is happening there. Some people feel that most of Africa is hostile towards Israel. Don't you think that there is a gap in terms of telling people that Africa is a place? And that people are not inherently against Israel. There is no inherent hostility to Israel. Don't you think that both of we, the Israelis and we Africans, need to do more in terms of telling people the truth?
Thank you, His Excellency. One last question. Anyone? So, ask Avi, Arye, and then Eli.
I want quickly to touch on a couple of issues and answer the questions. First of all, I want to relate to something that Avidar has mentioned regarding Gaddafi and his impact. I will share with you one story. About 4 years ago, the president of Burkina Faso was on his way for a state visit to Israel, and he received, while on the plane, a call from Gaddafi. And Gaddafi offered him $150 million to build a new airport in Burkina Faso if he turns the plane around and doesn't reach Israel. You know the story. I can tell you that story without offending the president of Burkina Faso, because he decided not to accept the offer. And he did land in Israel, and he told us that story. And I don't know if his expectation was to get from us the $150 million, but at least he thought it was a funny story to share with us. The end result was that the visit was a very important one. Since then, we do have very good relations with Burkina Faso, and we look at Burkina Faso's development with great interest. And Gaddafi, we all know where he is now. Another issue that has been raised earlier, and also Ambassador, His Excellency, Ambassador Lawi of Ethiopia has mentioned, and this is the whole issue of the various Islam, various Africa, and also the knowledge about Israel. We just recently have hosted, for the first time in many, many years, 6 Sufi leaders from Senegal. And it was a very, very exciting visit for us as well as for them. They spent 10 days in Israel, traveling all over. One of them told me a story which I want to share with you, and it shows a little bit about the kind of difficulties that we in Israel have in understanding Africa, and Africa has in understanding Israel. First of all, they were the nicest and friendliest guests we've ever had, I have to tell you, in Israel. They were absolutely fabulous people, great leaders. Senegal. But one of them told me one of the first requests they had upon arrival was to pray in an Al-Aqsa Mosque, which makes a lot of sense. And of course, right from the hotel, as soon as they've landed, we have taken them to Al-Aqsa Mosque and they have prayed there. And then in the evening, when I met them, one of them said to me, you know, I have to share with you a true story. As we were there in Al-Aqsa Mosque, and we were hosted by the Waqf, we came out and I looked around, and I said to my guide from the Waqf, I said, where are the Israeli tanks? And he said, what tanks? You are in Al-Aqsa Mosque. What tanks? I said to him, what do you mean what tanks? The Israeli tanks that are surrounding the Al-Aqsa Mosque and that are actually threatening the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And the Waqf guy said to me, I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. There are no tanks around the Al-Aqsa Mosque. You came freely to pray in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And he said to me, you know, it dawned on me that the message we are getting very often in Africa is a wrong message. I said to him, don't blame me, blame your own television networks. And he said, you know, one of the first things that we are going to do is have a press conference in Senegal, in Dakar, and tell our experiences in Israel. And they did. They did. On national television, there was an hour program, and the headline of the program was, sorry, there are no tanks surrounding Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this is part of the difficulties that we have in Africa. But let me touch on a specific question that was asked to me, and my answer is given by you, not by us. I looked at the last figures issued by IMF of the potential growth in the year 2015-2016 in Africa. The potential economic growth in Africa. And I see figures like, and I'll quote to you, Ghana, 10.1%, Cote d'Ivoire, 7.3%, Congo, 7.7%, Burkina Faso, 5%, Kenya, 7.5%, Ethiopia, 7.2%, up to, by the way, for the next couple of years, it's 7.5%, Uganda, 6%, Cameroon, 6.5%, and so forth and so on. The potential growth in Africa is immense. Those are the figures that actually are presented to the Israeli business sector. They look at those figures and they say, we'd better be there. We'd better share the development. We'd better share in the progress. We'd better share in the growth. And it goes on and on and on. Not, of course, talk about Nigeria with over 7%. So those are the real answers to your question. You are providing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Erlich?
I want to respond to the ambassador of Ethiopia. First of all, a colleague of mine to the board of the Israel-Africa Chamber of Commerce is Dr. Itzik Gani, right behind the ambassador of Nigeria. And I can assure you, Ambassador, that in the last, let's say, 18 months, the Chamber is quite active in terms of raising awareness of the business potential in Africa and creating conferences on all sorts of subjects and credit, information, etc. But basically, I want to say something here, that we are a very small country. And I'm quite different from some colleagues of mine in the past that thought that we are going to Africa and we will bring the light and innovation and we will change the world. Yes, we can change the world, but with a lot of humbleness. And we are a very small country, very small economy in comparison to the key players in Africa. But we would like to make a difference. We definitely would like to make a difference. And whenever we go into investment and a business contract with the government, we don't put in the contract that revenues from a specific project will come to this company for the next 20 or 30 years. We don't think this way. Your governments do not need to start learn Hebrew just to do business with us. We are small, flexible, efficient. In the same time, one of the key problems that we face with the Israeli business community when we try to attract new companies that were never active in the African continent, we tell them come to Africa. We made some kind of a research, and 80% of them, 80% of the companies that never had a chance even to go to Africa, they say, I don't know people there. And we explain and we say, this is a new ball game. Today, if you say to a UBS bank official, credit official, I'm the friend of the president, you get out of the room in 2 seconds. You not only that you cannot get credit, you will lose all your credit, all your credibility, even to stay in the room of this international bank. And we make a major effort by raising the awareness through articles, TV interviews, conferences, and I believe that we are doing a positive job. I don't want to give us credit, but we enlarged the number of Israeli business companies in the chamber. We tripled the number in the last 12 months. And I believe that this will continue. But if I will say one word that can make things even faster, when I spoke about credit, if your governments will say we will give national guarantee for infrastructural projects 100% for any contract that will go inside our country, you not only will see the number of Israeli companies booming in numbers, but you will see projects in your own countries going very, very, very fast without the need to dedicate your future income in the next 20 years when you sign a contract with a different kind of nationality. And now I'm a diplomat here. Thank you very much.
I want to conclude with one point raised by Ambassador Erlich from Ethiopia. Indeed, Islam is not the enemy. For one good reason, there is no such thing as Islam, or Al-Islam is something monolithic, as some of the radicals would like to lead us to believe. You can be everything under the title of being a Muslim. You can be moderate and constructive and considerate and whatever you, or you can be radical and fanatical like in Christianity, like in Judaism. And you are right, in your country, the contribution of Muslims into the general economic growth, the situation in the last 20 years or so is really very, very meaningful. What used to be a Christian country is now a land of all of its citizens, with the Muslims contributing to the economic growth very, very significantly. So we shall have now 15 minutes of break and we reconvene at 12 o'clock. Thank you very much and take all the panelists.